Imagine it's 1998 and Respawn Entertainment has just released their latest title, Apex Legends, a groundbreaking battle royale game for the PS1. Of course that never happened, but I thought it would be a fun challenge to create my own version of what that might have looked like if we did indeed live in that world, and so I got to work. As is usually the case, the first thing I worked on was recreating a character from the game, since that's always really fun to do. Out of all the choices, I decided to recreate the character Wraith, since I like her design and she's got some interesting abilities. I decided to make the game in third-person perspective since FPS games were still fairly rare on consoles at the time. During modeling, the most important thing I had to keep in mind was making sure I kept my polygon count as low as possible. The PS1 had very limited hardware, and game artists had to adopt a simple style in order to use resources efficiently. Over time, that lo-fi blocky look came to define the aesthetic of that era. Once I was done, I had a model made up of just under 400 triangles, and I think I was mostly successful in avoiding the Lara Croft effect. And so the next thing to do was give the model some color and texture. Initially, I thought it would be better to create the textures first and then apply them to the model afterwards, but eventually I decided to try something different and paint the textures directly on the model itself. First, I started by blocking out the general shapes and colors to see how everything would fit together. And once I was happy with that, I began painting in all the little details. This was by far the most time-consuming step of this whole process, but also the most fun. Once I was done, I had a somewhat simplified version of Wraith that's actually missing quite a few things compared to the original. But actually, I should have simplified her even more, and I'll explain why later. Either way, I was happy with the results, and so it was time to animate. One thing that I've realized is that I don't really enjoy animating all that much, and so to save myself a lot of headache, I decided to use some pre-made animations from a website called Mixamo. In the game, Wraith was famous for her Naruto-style run animation before they removed it because it was too OP, but there was no way I was getting rid of it. After that, I created a gun and some shooting mechanics, and I also began working on Wraith's special abilities. In the game, Wraith has an ability called Into the Void that makes her invisible and immune to damage. To emulate that, I just made her model transparent when using the ability. Wraith's other ability is her ultimate ability called Dimensional Rift, where she creates a portal connecting 2 points on the map, allowing herself and others to quickly travel between those two locations without risk of dying. Recreating this ability exactly like the game would have taken way too much time, and so instead, I just quickly made this portal graphic, and I faked the teleportation just by making Wraith invisible when she stepped into the portal. After that, I created some killable enemies, which are just Wraith clones, and at this point I had most of the basics covered. Now, all that was really left to do was create an environment for the game to take place in, and I also gave the enemy wraiths some AI so that they could shoot back at you. And then finally, I added the Ring of Death because the game just isn't a battle royale without one. And that's pretty much it. But of course, in this state, the game still looks nothing like a PS1 game. And so for the final part of the project, I focused on getting the game to look and feel like it came from 1998. The first thing I did was lower the resolution of the game. I explained in another video how the PS1 could only output a signal of 320 by 240 pixels, giving the game a very pixelated look. The PS1 did support interlacing for higher resolutions, but not many games took advantage of that. The next thing I did was change the aspect ratio of the game to 4:3 instead of the 16 by 9, which is common today. This of course had to do with the dimensions of television screens that were made at the time, and so the tighter aspect ratio has become associated with that retro look. And finally, I had to emulate the wobbly texture quirk that PS1 games are known for. This happened because the PS1 didn't do accurate perspective calculations in 3D, and so the textures would warp and jiggle, especially when viewing them from up close. This is no longer an issue on modern gaming devices, and so to recreate the effect, I had to use a shader to emulate it. Luckily, I was able to find a working shader someone had created, and all I needed to do was copy and paste the shader code into my game. And as you can see, the results are quite convincing. I'll leave a link to the shader down below. Unfortunately, I couldn't put the shader on Wraith herself because it completely destroyed all the details in her model. This wouldn't have been a problem if I made her model less complex like I mentioned earlier, but at this point it was too late to go back. Anyways, after adding some finishing touches, I finally had a complete demo. If I were to make this into a full game, I would have to redo pretty much everything. I would use a simpler model for Wraith, as well as all the other Apex characters. I would spend more time creating higher quality textures, and I would have to implement multiplayer so that it would actually be a battle royale. Sounds like an interesting project, but honestly, I've got other things I want to work on, so it'll probably just stay a demo. Hopefully I can release it so you can try it for yourself, but only if EA isn't going to sue me into oblivion for copyright infringement, so I'll let you know what the status is on that later on. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, bell, links to my social media down below, and as always, have a nice day. Thank you.